So we have collated the frequently asked questions of those over 100 pre-submitted questions, collated those to the topics that cover a whole wide range of products and obviously services that Triodos offers. To answer these questions, I would like to welcome to the panel the senior leadership team. I've got Phil Bate, Director of Business Banking, to my far left, your far right, I'm imagining. I've got Roger Hatton, Director of Retail Banking, Zoe Ruthven, Director of Marketing and Communications, and obviously going to welcome back Bevis as well, which is kind of a weird. I always find it weird welcoming everyone to their own bank that they work at. But anyway, welcome everybody. We're going to start with a question which was submitted by Jess. It did sort of touch on a lot of questions that other people answered. And this is about truly green investments. The question is, can you envisage truly green stocks and shares ISAs competing on performance with others on the market? I'm looking at Roger as Director of Retail Banking because I think this is your bag, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Jess, as well. I know a number of people have been interested in overall fund performance in the last year or so, and I think I'd just want to caveat everything I say just by saying we're not here giving financial advice in a formal way. Obviously, people would need to go and speak to their own advisors for that. The short answer to my question is yes. I think we can realistically expect to see stocks and shares and ethical funds perform in a similar way or even superior way to other funds in the marketplace. But there is a but, and the but is it's around the long term. Let me just explain and unpack that a little bit. Yeah. When you invest in a Triodos investment fund or another ethical fund, you are explicitly making a choice to be in the sectors that support all the things we've been hearing so far in terms of developing a thriving society and an environmentally sustainable planet. And you are therefore explicitly moving out of some of the sectors which don't support that, so fossil fuels and armaments and so on. And that means that the funds at different parts in the economic cycle or affected by global events may perform differently. And we've seen that very actively in the last 4 years. During the pandemic, there was a lot of movement into the kinds of stocks and shares that Triodos funds and so on invest in. But after the invasion of Ukraine and the spike in energy prices, that's changed and reversed things. And we know that the fossil companies have been printing money during that phase, and that's been reflected in their performance. However, if you take a long run view, we think that that's going to change for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of academic evidence now by people like Alex Edmonds, Professor of Economics at London Business School, and Mark Carney, former Governor of the Bank of England, who are saying that as we go through a transition that we must go through, that the money will follow those things. And I think secondly, and probably finally, I think Bevis said, money is not neutral, and we do have to make a moral and ethical choice about where our funds go. So whilst we think that will support long-term investment returns, frankly, there are no returns on a planet that we can't live on. And so we need to, I think, put our morals behind our money in that sense as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And thank you as well to Jess for that question. It's an election year, in case no one's noticed. Julia has sent in this question, which asks, what can Triodos and its customers do to persuade politicians to keep their promises on the environment? That's a big one. Is it a communication challenge, Zoe?
Well, I think it's a great question, and it was a really strong theme, as you said, probably not surprising given upcoming elections, not just in the UK, but globally. As you can imagine, we try to avoid being party political, but we spend a lot of our time talking about why and how the banking sector should move to focus more on people and the planet, and it's really difficult to avoid that becoming political. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to be using our voice and be using our own power. So you've already heard from Bevis, Jaco and Andy Roon Rijpkema, lots of the ways in which we try to use our voice as a business. And that included at the tail end of last year, supporting organisations like Business Declares. We were part of a delegation that went and knocked on Rishi Sunak's door to present he wasn't in, unfortunately, for tea and biscuits. But we were taking action on behalf of over 2,000 business leaders, calling for the government to kind of immediately stop investment in new fossil fuels, to rapidly scale up investment in renewable energy, and take action to protect nature. And I think many of us feel frustrated that this government hasn't honoured its commitments. And I think if we think about there are lots of ways we as consumers can support those lobbying for these things. I mean, many of our customers and partners do that, whether it's Friends of the Earth, RSPB, Soil Association. So we can definitely swing behind others. And I think a really great live example would be the Climate and Nature Bill that's being championed by an organisation called zerohour.co.uk, which is really calling for change, and we're certainly getting behind that. But I think we have to understand that governments only take action really when they know they've got public sentiment on their side. And we've seen that. And if we think, and this might seem a strange comparison to think about the smoking ban on smoking outside, you know, that only happened because the government felt there was enough support for it. So I think it's really incumbent on us to keep calling out the things that we're not happy with, both how we vote, where we spend our money, the organisations Make My Money Matter, thinking about our own kind of, it's often easy to feel like we have no agency, but we sometimes actually do have more agency than we think.
Okay. I mean, yeah, frustrating, I think, for the amount of flip-flopping on policies is pretty frustrating. Bevis, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
Well, I think Zoe described very well, you know, we work very hard not to politicise the bank and work within an ecosystem of all sorts of organisations that can play a different role. But our job, I think, is to have a very strong voice on certain issues and policy. So you will, like we have with the non-proliferation treaty, being very strong. We wrote to the Prime Minister about that, saying, actually, we really would like the UK government to show leadership on this. We got a pretty weak response back, again, advocating the UK has led on net zero and been very successful, which tends to ignore the fact we've exported a lot of our emissions in the process of reducing our own footprint. But you know, today in the news is the Labour Party's sort of advocacy for renationalising the railways, and I don't think it's our job to sort of get involved in what the mechanisms are. But we as a bank have previously advocated that public transport should be the cheapest, most convenient, safest form of transport in the UK. It's key to social mobility. It's key to achieving net zero targets. So we should certainly continue to weigh in on those sort of policy issues, but not get involved in the arguments about how they necessarily are delivered and the tribalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly on the theme of today with, you know, talking about future generations, a lot of those youth activists that we've been seeing out on the streets over the last few years are coming of age. They're reaching voting age. So that'll be quite exciting. That's quite hopeful. Sticking with the theme of positive impact for future generations, we've got a question from Marilyn, which is, how do cities need to change for Gen Z to thrive? And I mean, we're talking here about the young people born between the mid-90s, mid-noughties. Phil, what role can a bank, I'm going to you because obviously we need to get you to speak, but, you know, what role can a bank play in creating cities for the future? And we're talking about Gen Z, but there's Generation Alpha, which are out, they're coming.
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's a really big question, Marilyn. So yeah, thank you for asking it. I'll try and keep my answer relatively short. I think it plays really well to what Jaco was talking about earlier, actually, our 5 transition themes. And if we can get those working, if we look at how we would design a city for these people, we talk about food and resources and well-being and energy and society, and they sort of all play into that design. I'm going to start at probably a really predictable place, so accommodation. I think if we look at young people coming forward now, they really struggle to get into affordable, high quality, high environmental properties. So I think any design of a city would have to have that sort of at the core. Secondly, probably thinking about, we often talk between cities and countryside, sort of nature, you can have one or the other. So how do we bring nature into the cities for people to interact with? So not just green space and places to congregate and be in nature, but I think also food generation and how we get communities together within the city, generating food and being sort of part of that whole process. There's so many different ways we could talk about this question. Looking at energy usage and how we generate energy within the city. And I think if we're designing that from scratch, we need to be thinking around things like energy loading and demand, where we have peaks and troughs now that are really difficult to manage. So how can we design that out of the system? We could touch on transport, and Bevis has already mentioned around those points, and the arts and culture, and how Generation Z and others will sort of interact with that in maybe a different way to others. So how do we build that into the design of the city? I think maybe I'll just wrap up sort of just to mention, we saw it on the slides earlier on around the Centre for Thriving Places and the Wellbeing Index. So how can we take the lessons that have already been learnt and the recommendations that have come through and build that into the design of the cities, acknowledging that maybe GDP isn't the only measure of success, maybe not even a good measure, some may say. So how can we look at ensuring we have a city that thrives, whether GDP is up or down?
So this is something that the bank's able to support, like in many ways, in all these sectors, presumably.
Yeah, and we do quite a lot of work around placemaking. So, looking at regeneration of particular areas. Some will surprise people. I think in a previous annual event, we showcased the UK's first sort of outdoor swimming centre in Brighton, which was regeneration of a derelict part of the seafront. So we look, which also integrates sort of net zero business units and things like that. But so we do a lot of work on regeneration. But yeah, I mean, I think all of the agendas Phil's described we're involved with in some way. We also love community ownership. We think sort of people owning and designing their neighbourhoods and so on is a very powerful thing, which is why we've historically always supported community land trusts, community asset transfer, and many projects where people really have a more democratic control over development.
Wow. Okay. Lots of pieces in the puzzle. It sounds like you need to know what direction you want to travel in, though, I think is probably the most important thing. We got a final question from John. This is actually something that I've unpacked in my podcast. I'm going to a little plug there, episode 10, if you want to hear it. So this is a question about solar arrays on farmland. And the question is simple. Does Triodos support solar arrays on farmland?
Oh, that's probably one
for
me again, okay. I think, actually. It's a great question, because it gets to the heart of what it means to be an ethical bank. So if we were a normal bank, we'd look at security, we'd look at return, sector limits, we'd lend, or we wouldn't based on those criteria. But I think if you're an ethical bank, you then have to factor in a whole range of different factors that lead into ethical dilemmas. So naturally, as Triodos, we want to support renewable energy. We want to continue to get the pipeline of generation going. And Jaco on his slide showed how we're sort of first in the world for number of deals arranged, which is great. But that shouldn't be at the expense of food and biodiversity. I think whenever you do one good thing at the expense of another good thing, you're just storing up a problem for future generations, as we see some of those issues coming to bear now. So to go into some of the detail, just for a moment, in the UK, whenever a new scheme's put forward, you have to have an environmental impact assessment done. And that looks at things like water quality, biodiversity, nitrous oxide, and so forth. And we use that to inform our lending decisions. We'll have that reviewed by our external specialist. We'll have our internal specialist review it, and it really sort of feeds into our decision making. In the UK as well, you can grade agricultural land on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. We'd only support proposals on grades 4 and 5. So the poorer quality lands, we're never taking the higher quality land out of production. But I think land use is actually only one part of that ethical lending dilemma when looking at renewable energy. So a sector that should be a slam dunk for Triodos, sector we're really involved in, but you have to look at supply chains. You have to look at human rights abuses in there. So that means we won't be buying or won't be supporting our customers to buy parts from certain parts of the world and trying to factor that into our design. You have to look at the components that go into those and those that have the highest or the most negative environmental impacts, and trying to exclude those, so you're not just pushing the problem further up the supply chain. And how the schemes interact with the local community and so forth. So something that should be really straightforward actually has a whole range of different dilemmas you have to factor in. And I hope that gives people confidence, the fact that we are thinking about these things, because actually you need to bring them into the open and have that debate to really decide what's the right way to go or not. And I have listened to the podcast, and it doesn't sound like it would be a scheme that would meet those criteria in terms of what we look for.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to very briefly, because that scheme that I feature in If I Rule the World podcast, I know it's a big ambition, not actually that I want to, but yeah, it was a triple SI site as well. So it wasn't just, bog standard farmland, just to make that clear. But thank you for the detail, because the detail is important, as they say. So we're going to wrap up the pre-submitted questions. There's still time. We're going to be taking a second session of live questions from you. So if you've still got questions that have not been answered by the panel yet, this is your chance in that little Q&A box. We're going to take a short break, though. We're going to be looking at a film. This is a little teaser of a new groundbreaking documentary that Triodos has helped to sponsor. It's called Sea, Land and City, and it shines a bright spotlight on the UK's most powerful and inspiring people and projects that are making a difference for nature and for future generations.
Why don't we take a physical adventure across sea, land and city here in the UK in order to spotlight the most pioneering nature-based solutions and the people behind them. What do they look like? What do they feel like? And what is their real potential for impact to help people see it and sense it?
We are so excited to be part of the Sea Land City initiative. At Waterbear, our real focus is to unite culture, impact and of course incredible storytelling. This project, obviously exploring the regions in the southwest through a kind of female-owned narrative, is something that we really, really care about, and we're just buzzing to be the main distribution partners.
Really excited at the Crown Estate to be supporting Sea, Land and City. It's exactly what our business does, and the connection between Sea, Land and City needs to be at the heart of how we approach nature recovery for the UK.
I think it's really important that we showcase these business opportunities and the projects out there, just to give people a sense of what nature's all about and really connect them with the projects, and hopefully actually they'll go on to potentially invest in different projects, but also connect themselves with the projects.
In the Solent, we're bringing together 10 different organisations to restore a whole ecosystem, and I'm really interested by the opportunities for this project to bring people who otherwise would never see that and really introduce them to it, and try to help people understand what's actually happening in our marine environment.
Well, I hope that's whet your appetite. The full film will be out later this year, and you can keep an eye out on Waterbear, which is a free streaming platform. It's a little bit like Netflix, but for the planet, focusing on environmental stuff. So as promised, we are now going to be answering your live questions that you've been posting. We're going to start with a question from Claire. Do you have any plans to add functionality like pots for different savings in the app?
I guess I'm going to take that one, Gillian, thanks. I guess we've been focusing on the last year, as Bevis mentioned in his speech, about functionality improvement of the app, and we've seen that come through in some of the usage scores and so on that we're getting. But we are now beginning to get to a point where we can start to improve and enrich the functionality. And a lot of people, I think, and it's implied by the questions, do like to demarcate in their own mind what they're using their savings for, and so this old-fashioned idea of putting money in pots for different things is still, I think, very psychologically alive for a lot of people in the way that they think about their savings. And even in the last few weeks, we've created a little bit of functionality in our app, which allows you to set a savings goal. And what that does is it renames your account to your savings goal. So it might be your retirement party or your child's wedding or whatever it is that you're saving for. And it allows you to set goals, and then will prompt you to save towards those goals. So that's already functionality which has literally come live in the last few weeks, and we are going to be developing that. So there are some plans already to improve and enrich the functionality of that still further, to allow people to set multiple goals, or to prompt them towards those kind of positive behaviours in terms of making sure that they're encouraged and so on to do that. So the short answer is yes.
Wow, okay. That's actually made me realise I've really got to up my savings game.
Good, you know where it's
Puts
going.
me to shame, actually, that someone actually asked that question. We're going to try and get through these quickly, because I know we've got quite a few questions. We've got a question from Valeria. Why do more people not decide to become your customers, choose your services? And there's an add-on here, considering your progressive, impact-led mission, what holds them back?
I think I should probably
Question
take that.
for Zoe,
Yeah.
perhaps.
So listen, there's probably a big part of like not enough people yet know about our difference. So it's really difficult to engage with a bank that you haven't heard of. And despite us being a mid-sized bank, you know, it's still our brand awareness. If you think about the many millions that the mainstream banks have at their disposal to do TV advertising, out-of-home advertising, we have to play a slightly different game. Now, that's not to say also that we're the right bank for everybody or for every business, because we're potentially not. But we are very well known in the sectors we serve, and we're very well known. I think if your values align to ours, then it's quite possible that you'll have read Ethical Consumer Magazine or Positive News, or you're active in the ecosystem of organisations that are championing the same things as us. So I think increasingly, I mean, Bevis mentioned greenwashing earlier. We are seeing consumers potentially, even those that may have heard of us, which is great, greenwashing is confusing people. So people may be opting for a green enough solution, not really fully understanding our difference. So there's definitely a job for us to do around that. And we are looking at the moment about how we better articulate that difference in a bite-sized way. But you'll appreciate, I mean, I know you've been a long-standing customer, but how you really explain our difference in a way that doesn't just criticise the mainstream banks and create an invitation for people to engage with us is quite challenging. But, you know, we have our 30th anniversary next year, which is really exciting. We'll have been in the UK for 30 years. You know, we know what we're doing. So that's a great moment to remind people of that difference. And I think also Roger has talked about, we do know there are some hygiene factors in some of our products, perhaps, you know, the personal current account as an example, which we've always seen as an accessible product for a younger kind of population. We know there are some hygiene factors to overcome, and we're hoping to be able to achieve that later this year. So banging the drum, I think all of our lovely customers advocating for us is really helpful too. Keeping up the work we're doing to call for change, keeping up awards, accreditations, just spreading the word really. And our customers are brilliant at helping us to do that. So that's definitely something that those watching or watching on playback can really help with, you know. Okay. And we do have, quick plug, we do have like a refer a friend scheme to help with that as well.
Okay. Sorry, hygiene factors? That's a new term for me.
Sorry, I slipped into, I guess, I mean, Roger, you probably, do you want to pick up the...
It's things like the mobile payments. So I referred in my speech earlier that things are coming later. But yeah, I'm really positive. I think at the end of this year that we shouldn't be in a place where we're apologising. I think the products will be in a very good place. We won't be a bank that provides absolutely everything for everybody. But I love the spirit behind Valeria's question, because we really want to grow the bank and have more customers. The biggest thing that would make a difference, though, would be regulation that required transparency. We publish every loan and investment that we make, so people can ask us and challenge us if they don't agree with what we're doing. You have no idea what most of the mainstream banks are doing with your money. So that would be the thing that would put a rocket under the consciousness of society and how their money is used.
Yeah, transparency is definitely a huge sell. We've got another question. This is, can't see who that's from, but it says, why have you made a requirement to download the mobile app to open an account? I think this is excluding people who can't afford a mobile phone. That's a good question.
I think I probably should take that one. This is a tricky one because we all know that the banking industry has evolved from what was a face-to-face model predominantly, perhaps 20 or 30 years now, to essentially a digital world. And we know that more than 85% of our customers engage with us digitally already. But we're also trying to recognise where customers in general's preferences are, and that in terms of new customers and the direction of travel of the industry is definitely into mobile banking. But with that, we are also needing to raise the quality and the level of security that comes with that. Because I'm afraid to say, when you look at the crime statistics around financial crime and fraud, they're through the roof at the moment. And I'm afraid good old-fashioned passwords and usernames are now really not sufficient to keep customers' accounts secure. And mobile phones do allow us to provide the highest level of authentication and security, and keep our customers' funds safe. So that's the primary reason that we've been doing that. But I just want to say that we do provide support to our customers, either directly via our fantastic co-workers in the customer contact areas, who you get through to speak to a real human. And we've got an organisation that we work with called Citizens Online, who help people who are excluded to access digital accounts and the digital world more generally. And also, just to say finally, once you have got that authentication done through your phone, you are still able to completely service the rest of your accounts on a larger screen on your laptop or your browser at home if you need to. So we do recognise it's a balance, but we think on balance that's the right thing to do.
Okay, great. Well, that's actually the last question we've been able to take for the live questions. But if you do have more questions, keep sending them in. The team are going to be on hand for the rest of the event, and also even after the event, to continue asking and answering your questions, I should say. I know that this element of having direct conversation with customers is really important to the Triodos team, so keep them coming.